because we can't go to the theatre, we're deprived of theatrical dialogue in all of its senses. So I thought I'd do some interviews with British playwrights about their work to keep thinking about theatre, writing, and the world. Today's lockdown playwright is Tim Crouch. Tim spent 15 years or so working in theatre as an actor before becoming frustrated with the conventional divisions between actors over here, directors over here, writers over there, as well as the impoverished conception of theatrical representation in quite a lot of British theatre. Like many of the playwrights that I'm speaking to in these videos, he works collaboratively in developing his plays. Unlike most of the playwrights I'm speaking to, he often performs in his own plays himself. His first major piece was My Arm in 2003, which is a monologue. It's a monologue about a boy. Well, it's about a man who, as a boy, decided one day to raise his arm above his head and never put it down. And he never puts it down for the rest of his life. Tim Crouch performs the monologue as this man, but never at any point in the performance does he put his arm above his head, which opens up a fascinatingly productive gap between fiction and representation that raises really interesting questions about how theatre works, what it means when we're looking at the theatre, what we think is the relationship between the things we're seeing on stage and the things we take to be going on, or the fictions that are being represented. And these are ideas that Tim has continued to explore with greater and greater complexity and daring over the course of his other plays. So in An Oak Tree in 2005, it's a play for two performers, but one of them has never seen the script before, and they are fed their lines in front of us during the performance. In his play England in 2007, two actors, one female, one male, simultaneously play a single character between them. In 2018's Beginners, adults play children. In 2010's John Antonio and Nancy, children sort of play adults. Adler and Gibb from 2014 plays real conceptual games with unreal conceptual art. The Author in 2009 took place entirely inside a theatre audience, and the action took place entirely inside the audience's heads. And last year's play, Total, Immediate, Collective, Imminent, Terrestrial Salvation, I keep losing the book when I hold it away from my body, is a hymn to theatre and a warning against it. I think it's also worth underlining he's shown an unusually strong commitment to making work for children, most notably, I think, in his series of one-person Shakespeare plays, I Caliban, I Peas Blossom, I Banquo, I Malvolio, and I Sinner, which take characters from The Tempest, Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, Twelfth Night, and Julius Caesar. And they play no less complex and intriguing theatrical games with their young audiences than the adult plays do. To say that he interrogates the foundations of theatre might make the play sound rather forbidding or abstract, but in fact, Tim Crouch's theatre is extremely welcoming, it's grounded, it's funny, and it's thrilling. The perplexing shocks of the author were visceral. The pomposity of Malvolio in I Malvolio is preposterously funny. The concluding scenes of An Oak Tree are wonderfully moving. It's always a pleasure to speak to Tim Crouch. Anyway, so hi, Tim.
Hi.
How are you doing? How are you finding lockdown? How is lockdown at Crouch Towers?
I don't like to admit it, but we're having quite a good time.
Are you really?
In a way, yeah. This is a time when I would have been at home writing,
Okay.
because there's a second series of this TV thing
Oh
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
due to start filming in June, and now that's been postponed indefinitely. But it had the go-ahead, so it will happen. So I'm having more time than I thought I'd have to write it with Toby Jones.
Right.
So I was at home anyway. Jules, my wife, is at home anyway because she's doing similar sorts of stuff. We went to Surrey and picked up my youngest, Joe, from university there the night that Boris Johnson announced lockdown. So he came and joined us. And then 2 days ago, his partner, his girlfriend, Rose, came to join us. So there are 4 of us. I mean, Dan, we are just so lucky. We have a garden, you know, and I had a little swim in the sea today. We are allowed to swim in the sea. We talked to a police officer and they said it was fine as long as we didn't sort of lounge around. So, you know, it's all right. And I think of all those people who are in a far less fortunate position than we are. So far it's good. I haven't gone crazy. Joe and Rose are vegan, so the food is pretty good at the moment.
Okay.
I don't want to sound smug. I sound smug, but it's okay. And I've had conversations with people who are having it much harder.
Yeah.
Obviously.
In one of the introductions to this, I sort of half jokingly say that lots of playwrights, for them, lockdown is just the old normal, you know, just sort of being stuck inside in front of a computer for weeks on end. But of course, for you, that really isn't true. Your process is, there'll be that phase, but your process is also very, very much collaborative and in a room with other people, isn't it?
In the writing phase, no, it's as you describe. It's sitting on my bed, actually. I don't really have a desk of my own. And squeezing it out, you know, really squeezing, sometimes painfully so.
Right.
And then once that gets some shape, then I start to socialize with it. But prior to that, it's very much sitting on my own. So
Right.
yeah, it hasn't much changed how I would be now. I think my focus is more shot now than it might have been, partly because the deadline has gone. But then usually how I start a play would be without a deadline. But actually with the TV thing, that's a completely different structure.
Yeah.
So the deadline would have really focused me because writing for TV is, I think, very different from that sort of strange space of dreaming for theatre. I'm one part of a team on the TV, and I can't write freely as I might be able to do with the theatre stuff.
And I don't know if there is a general answer to this, but the kind of shows you make, do they typically start with one type of thing, like an image or an idea or a line of dialogue or something like that? Or do they all come from different places?
Yeah, different places. I would say categorically they don't come from character.
Right.
I know that some writers get visited by a character and they need to put that character in a space and find out what that character means to them. That's not usually at all how it's been for me.
Right.
But it is a variety of routes. Sometimes an interest in a formal possibility. So we'll talk about Terrestrial Salvation, and that was about a play where the audience shared in the reading of the play. So I wanted to explore that because I'd done bits of that in previous shows, which we can talk about when we get to that. I'm trying to think what else. Often it's form, Dan. A play of mine called Beginners was about wanting to see, being frustrated partly by watching adult actors pretending to be children, and was freed by the thought of what would happen if adult actors played children without pretending to be children. And often those thoughts are connected around what will happen with an audience, to release an audience. So often those thoughts will be around a sense of contradiction to some degree. And in that contradiction exists a space of resolution where the audience exists. So maybe all of the inspirations when they come are somehow connected to the live action of an audience in the space. I think with the author, that play, that became that came out of a desire to formalize this relationship with the audience facing each other. Sometimes they are sort of more ideological things. An Oak Tree began because I wanted to write about hypnosis and loss.
Right.
And also, the thing that must be said is any play subsequent to the first play is in some way inspired by the previous play or the previous plays.
Right. Yeah.
So you're never writing without those antecedents in your mind. So an Oak Tree formally explores things that I did in the first one, My Arm, which is about taking inanimate objects and imbuing them with meaning. So we expanded that. Me and Andy Smith in a conversation expanded that into human beings. But the first thing that came was an idea around loss and hypnotism, and then came a story around loss and hypnotism, and then came the form, which was around an actor who didn't know the play. So they are long, circuitous routes. I think Terrestrial Salvation actually partly began narratively because I wanted to write about religion.
Yeah.
I wanted to write about religion. So the idea of a community reading together is obviously common to the religious act. So those two things combined nicely. And it's the Terrestrial Salvation took several years of just noodling. In between doing other things and touring other things and playing the back catalogue, and then gradually the fog clears and the shapes gain definition. But it's very rarely I want to adapt this thing or I want to tell this story. It's never as simple as that.
And when you talk about the fog clearing, I mean that's a process that might last years,
yes.
And what are you doing in that time? Are you periodically writing stuff? Are you just thinking about it? Are you doing research, or are you just having it in the back of your mind and trusting that the back burner will sort stuff out? Because I think writers do all versions of those things sometimes.
Yeah, all of the above, I think. So revisiting a document practically on my laptop, the one that I'm talking into now, and usually they are inverted. So the most recent thoughts are at the top of that document, and the oldest thoughts are at the bottom of it. So it's just one document, and if I read through, I can see the inverted journey of an idea, really, and those Word documents. And then there are little sort of moments of. Well, I talked about it with you in France when we did that. I gave a talk in Paris for you about a hand clapping moments of revelation that suddenly unlock chambers of understanding. So the thing that I talked about in France was a realization that the story of Terrestrial Salvation should be about a solar eclipse. Again, I had that realization while sitting on a sofa, not at my laptop, not connected to work. And that thought then suddenly, it was like a penny fall. Suddenly everything dropped down and fell into place. It's not everything, but a huge block. And we ran miles forward in the process of thinking about that play in that one moment. And then it stops again, and because that one moment is great, but it then has a whole series of contingent things that need to be followed from that. So that takes another year or so. I remember with Salvation, Jules, who is a writer, my wife is a writer, we went to Italy, partly because she was writing a book set in Italy, and we did these writing weeks where we would book an Airbnb and we'd work from 6 o'clock in the morning till 1 or thereabouts. We would try and write, and then we would drink and swim and holiday. And I remember the sentence coming in Italy, which was, "Can I hear someone say yes?"
Right.
Can I hear someone say yes? Which is a line in Terrestrial Salvation. And again, a bit like that, it's about a solar eclipse. Can I hear someone say yes? Just did it for me.
Right.
So I would have written that line. I'd probably have clicked, increased the font size to 18, made it bold, I wouldn't then, burrow into it. I would then have a drink and go, we would joke about it, is that Jules writes novels. So she would write 2,500 words and feel like she's had a good morning. I might write, can I hear someone say yes? And feel fucking overjoyed by that.
Yeah, that's my work done for the day.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So we'd at lunch and drink, and we both felt equally like we'd been creative, because what that sentence did, and this is all sort of interior. It's not. I can't plot it on a graph on paper. It's an interior process that then opens a chamber of understanding that then pushes let's think about the penny falls. It pushes the coins closer to the edge. And then it can drop down, and then some more thoughts push another coin down and drop down. And eventually, if you're lucky, that little fiver on a wooden circle will fall into, and you'll get it. You'll still have spent over a fiver, but you'll have the fiver.
Well, what's interesting to me when you describe that process is because I think on one level, your work over the last kind of 20 years almost has been a really, really rigorous, complicated investigation of theatre and theatrical representation and stuff like that. And that's partly about the formal devices that are being used, and that of course makes it sound very kind of intellectual and rational. But on the other hand, you're also describing these moments of sort of intuition and revelation that you, as you say, you don't want to actually explore or try to understand as such. Can you say something about what the relationship is between understanding exactly what you're doing and not understanding what you're doing? Or is that impossible?
No, it's a really good question. So I did start a PhD in the late 90s, in 98, maybe 99, coming to the tail end of an acting career, mentally, slowly giving up on it. Started a PhD and couldn't do it. I think probably I did the wrong thing. I had the wrong supervisor, maybe, no disrespect to them, but I was not in the right place for it. But I was given a lot of theory to read, and I'm not an academic. And so I gave up the PhD after about a year and a half. And I would say that, in fact, the active engagement with ideas that the PhD enabled was incredibly useful. And also the fact that I gave up on it was also incredibly useful. And I kind of don't want to know too much, Dan. I mean, stupid thing to say. What I mean is I don't want to see or know where my work might reside. Do you know what I mean? That's not helpful for me. I'm always, because I'm a middle class wanker. It's always nice when academics might write about my work and suggest there are connections, and I'm thrilled for those connections to exist. But I don't at any point think about writing into those connections. I still can't really understand performance theory, or I will skim off the surface, like the author. I am very consciously, there's a stage direction that reads The Death of the Author, which I do know is as an essay which I have read, but can't entirely sort of render back to you. But I get provoked and excited by the surface of those ideas, which then find their resolution perhaps in a story or a form. But I couldn't then write academically about those ideas. And again, I think that's probably for my purpose a good thing. I think if I knew too much, if I was too conscious of what I was doing intellectually, then the pieces wouldn't be as fleshy as I want them to be.
And the kind of Word document that you described, this slowly accumulating Word document, is that kind of notes and ideas and bits of research, or does it include bits of what will actually be, the text?
Oh man, I've got it here. No, there will also be little exchanges.
Right.
There will be little exchanges. So in terms of the development of the story of Terrestrial Salvation, there will be little exchanges that will, to some degree, encapsulate the thinking that's gone before that.
Yeah.
And then we'll make them flesh, so that we'll make them into a live, active moment in space and time. And then I will keep going. And then I will read books. As any playwright will probably tell you, I think, if it's a generalization, I'm sorry, but, being told to read something for research is great, because you can be reading and also feel like you're writing. Yeah. Which is good. So I read lots and lots of books around Terrestrial Salvation. I spent a lot of money on a book about postmodernism and the Heaven's Gate cult. Oh my God, amazing book, downstairs at the moment. And I read that and noted that. And there are lots of notes in the margins there, and I would transfer some of those notes to the big Word document. And that might shift things along, and then there's always a process of then unlearning everything I've read from those books. Yes. Or removing, so because they are not, the plays should not be they should not be the result of research, really. Right. These ones are not that. My plays are not that. I'm not really writing about millennialism and cults. I'm writing about something else. So I need to, a bit like the PhD stuff, I need to have a little sort of flavor of it, and then I have to go away from it. Yeah. Because it then has to exist on its own and stand on its own legs, and not be in the shadow of other things or other texts or other bodies of ideas. So the books get read, and I feel like I'm doing good things by reading the books, and there might be one little sniff of something that will come from a big book that will find its way into the final thing. Right. What else do I do? So yeah, then the ideas then are exercised through, I suppose, conversations. And characters slowly begin to form because of that. But once again, if I say characters, it's not like the character is the primary motor here. I mean, I don't think I'm writing psychology. The nearest maybe I've come to that, I feel, in my work, is the play Beginners, where there are 4 very psychologically motivated characters. But the exciting thing about those characters is that they are also veiled in the form, in that you think they're adults with sexual and adult obsessions, and then you begin to, as an audience, understand they're not. But I wanted strong, identifiable characters to kind of keep things clear. I think that's why I went in that direction with those, with that play. With Terrestrial Salvation, I'm very clear about the backstory of where and in that play, the backstory is presented in the same way that Adler and Gibb. My God, the backstory is huge, and a lot of the work with Adler and Gibb went into creating backstory. Yeah. And then the idea is you kind of, as much as possible, leave it and step away from it. Yeah. You kind of have it somewhere, and you're writing on top of it. But if your writing just becomes a rendition of your backstory, then you're not making a present, active piece of theatre. I've got a bit lost.
No, that's really interesting. And so the actual production of a script, is that something that happens piecemeal over a long time, that you're writing a bit throughout the process, or are you? I know a lot of writers will do that thing where you're thinking, researching, making notes, whatever it is, to get yourself to the starting line, and then the actual writing of it might happen in a relatively short period of time, or what?
No. I don't structure. I don't go, and then this scene will do that, and that scene will do this, and then that scene will do that. And I remember when I was just beginning to be a writer, I got given Alan Ayckbourn's book, The Crafty Art of Playwriting, The Crafty Act of Playwriting. I mean, great for some people, but made no connections for me at all, really. Because there he does, my memory serves me right, he does advise people to structure meticulously before you actually start to write. Yeah. So no, I think a lot, and then I start to hear voices. And then voices go down, and then I look at what I've written, and that will usually trigger what happens next, what comes next from what I've done there. With Terrestrial Salvation, I'm going to show you this. Hang on, Dan. I know it's here because I've just been. One of the great things about quarantine is that I've cleared up stuff, so I know where stuff is. So this is we did a week of development at the National Theatre of Scotland in Glasgow, and what text I had for the play at that point, I printed out. En route to Glasgow, I stayed a day at Andy Smith's place in Lancaster, and he will remember this. I then cut out the script. I went to the Oxfam secondhand bookshop, got 4 books. This actually is Peter Brook's The Empty Space, which is kind of brilliant. And then I stuck the text into Peter Brook's The Empty Space, because we were working with 2 actors and with me and with Andy Smith and Carl James, so we had a book in our hands. So I made 4 copies of this book. One was Turgenev's Lower Depths. Oh my God, what were the other? They were just books taken from a secondhand bookshop. And there were 4, or maybe there were just 3 then, and the 2 actors and me, we all had a copy. So I have this copy. And also at that time, I put some illustrations in.
Yeah.
So these are photographs. I photographed a Bible that I found in Sweden. I went to my brother's wedding. There was a church. In that, there was a Bible, and it had illustrations. So I took photographs of those, and then I stuck the illustrations in. They have no bearing whatsoever to the story, but already by that time, I had a sense that, of course, illustrations would start to figure.
Right.
And it was after that week of development that actually illustrations became totally important to my thinking.
Right.
In terms of what illustrations could do, in terms of backstory, in terms of, exposition. So we worked for a week with a book like this, and then some practical tasks were engaged with. One was to find an illustrator, which the NTS, National Theatre of Scotland, did. Worked with me on an amazing illustrator called Rachna Jadhav, who is a theatre designer and a brilliant human being. And so to talk with her to start that process, we then did another week of development, by which time I had mostly completed the text, I think.
Right.
But we needed to test where the illustrations functioned in relation to the text, so I could then remove text because I knew that illustration would do that job, or I would understand the illustrations won't do that job, so I must increase text. So that, which is not a typical, I'm not talking in any typical sense, I think, in terms of making a play, but I don't structure and then write into my structure. Right. It is a process of the blind leading the blind to some degree, but based on a whole bank of hunches that are kind of quite rigorously tested. I mean, I would never sit down and go, I'm going to rigorously test hunches, but I think that's what's probably happening all the time. Yeah. Is this, if a hunch that I've had is still a good one after a year, I'll think that's probably a good one then.
Here's a really banal question, but like when you write, do you type? Do you handwrite? Does that figure in your work at all? Do you write different things down when you write with your hands than with a keyboard?
I will go on walks with a notebook like this.
Right.
And in that notebook, as walking is good for me, walking is a good thing, to take a pen and a little notebook, and if things come, then I will handwrite them. But no, my handwriting is almost illegible. So I have a laptop. I live through my laptop. I back up as often as I remember, and I Dropbox a lot of stuff. So I wouldn't be in that desperate a state if I lost stuff. But no, Dan, I don't longhand really anything at all. Just little notes in a notebook, and sometimes I might even just speak into my phone, and do a voice memo. If I haven't got my glasses on, then I can't write. I can't see what I'm writing.
And has the way you write and develop your plays changed over the last 17, 18 years? Or has it always been something similar as a process?
I think probably relatively stayed much the same. That sounds dreadful. Stayed much the same doesn't sound dreadful. Some plays come more easily than others.
Right. Okay.
I think that's, I don't know if that's a correlation between whether they're any good or not, whether they're better or not, but I can point at certain plays that I've written and gone, well, that just flopped out. And and they're usually probably a little bit more enjoyable, whereas there are other plays that took forever,
right,
and become slightly more heady experiments,
right.
So maybe not as ultimately satisfying, but satisfying as heady experiments. But there is always that to and fro. There has always been, from the first thing I wrote, which was this sort of short 5-day period of time for my arm, where I wanted to write about a boy who puts his arm above his head. And quite soon into that, I realized that I couldn't just write a play about it. I had to find a form that would accommodate that story. And I would say that every play subsequent to that is about either going in form first or story idea first, and then having a conversation between those two things.
And on the spectrum between flopping out and being a slightly more arduous process of growth, where does Terrestrial Salvation, where did that fit?
Midway, I would say, between
Right.
those two things.
Okay.
Because there is a level of conception.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, that's what takes its time, really. I would say, I have said that writing a play is like creating a universe from scratch, and so that it's not surprising that Terrestrial Salvation is slightly about that anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that you have to work out what the language is, what the rules are, what the world is. A play is something that has never existed before.
Yeah.
It's very easy to forget that. For anyone who creates anything that didn't exist before, that's a monumental work. And sometimes that can happen just in a blinding flash, in a big bang. And sometimes that happens laboriously. And so Terrestrial Salvation happened in flashes and with labor, but the flashes were really exciting. The flash of an illustration, the flash of an understanding of a story, the flash of the. I mean, are we all right to talk about that play?
Yeah.
To talk about the form of belief in theatre and the form of belief in the world, and that's not knowing it concretely or explicitly, but kind of smelling I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
For myself anyway, not for everyone, and feeling like there is richness to be mined from that, but not exactly knowing what it might be, but knowing that I did and I will, and I continue to see those overlaps between acts of belief, I suppose, acts of belief in the wider world as well as acts of belief in the theatre. Often in my work, that's a generalization, but I think it's true. Often in my work, I am trying to find the thing that exists in the theatre and to see where it exists in the world, or to find where it exists in the world and see what exists in the theatre.
Yes.
I think that's what I'm doing. It happens in the author, certainly.
Yeah.
The notion of spectatorship in that play. In Salvation, it's around belief, what we give up when we commit to something, when a group of people get together.
An oak tree as well. There is.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, the process of guidance that happens in an oak tree is not a process that is unique to the theatre.
Yeah.
So an investment. So I think that felt, Terrestrial Salvation felt it's slight. It's an hour and whatever it is, 10 minutes long, but took a huge amount of conceiving.
And you've said about that play that, I mean, you said that you were interested in a play that an audience read with you. And you've also said in this conversation that you wanted to write about religion. Did those thoughts come together at the beginning of the process, or did you start with a form and then you thought, actually, this is kind of about religion, or the other way around, or do you not know?
Yeah. I think, crudely, I wanted to write about the moment where belief is revealed to be empty,
Right.
or constructed. And I think I crudely imagined the moment where the zealot takes their own life, thinking that they will pass through into a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And I was excited by the moment where of the nothingness that zealot might find themselves in, and impossible to write nothing. And I think maybe we came as close as we can, as close as I can, in the very end of that play, because that play ends in nothing. There's a clock that ticks in that play. How long, what time is it? Less than an hour, less than 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and understanding that the world will end at the moment of solar eclipse. It was a sort of, I would be embarrassed to say what the premise of the play is, that the world would end at the moment of solar eclipse, when the Earth would pass through a black hole and into paradise.
Yeah.
But I only had to look at existing cults, or Heaven's Gate, for example, to realize that any outlandishness attached to that idea was nothing compared to some of the outlandishness existing in those, and in organized belief structures. So I knew, excitingly, that the promise of the play would not get fulfilled.
Right.
And so we together, slowly, together as an audience, we turn the pages. They get darker.
Yeah.
The sound of the birds and the wildlife dims down, as would do in a solar eclipse. Then there are, I think, 3 double pages of blackness and silence. And then the pages get a little lighter, and then a little lighter, and the crickets start to chirp, and the birds come back, and we do take an applause, but I find applause quite complex. I find it quite complex. I quite like plays where there is no applause at the end. My Malvolio solo has no applause at the end. He leaves them. Yes. He says he's going to come back. He never comes back. It was very unusual that a performance of the author would ever end in applause. And I kind of wanted the character of Miles in Terrestrial Salvation, who is a prick, to sit on his own in a circle with his eyes closed as audience members just walked out.
Right.
It's like that. For me, that's the encapsulation of, you fucking idiots. Can you see how empty this shit is?
Yeah.
It took us a while to find that. It took us a long time to find that. In the rehearsal period at the beginning of last year, we had lights going down, and then we realized we didn't need lights going down. We can do it all with the pages of the book. And that was another thrilling moment. And
I will say as well, it's such a ridiculous thing that we're sitting there in an audience. So in case people didn't see the show, exactly as you say, we've been told that here is this cult that believes that the world's about to end with a solar eclipse, and it's going to happen now. And we're reading. All we're doing is reading a book, and we go through like this. We go from a very very light page to a dark page, and then a darker page, and when we're in the dark bit, as we started coming out of it, I had such a sense of relief. It's so absurd. I was sitting there going, I don't think the world's ending, but I still have that, oh, thank God it hasn't ended. Even though I'm sitting reading
a book, and I
the
could
lights
skip
are
ahead
on.
if I wanted.
Yeah, you can totally, and you might have done anyway. The invitation, you come in, the books are on your table, on your chair, you sit down, you can flick through. I'm okay if you know, you can look through it, because nothing will mean anything until we put the meaning into it. I think. So pages going darker and then getting lighter again mean nothing. If you understand it means a failure of a belief system, then suddenly it's super sexy. I think always, Dan, the idea is to try to remove as much as, to remove as much as possible. To remove as much as possible. So as would be the case in, I think, all the plays, but maybe not uniquely, particularly in Salvation, is that we don't look like the characters. In the book, there are illustrations of the characters. The joy for me is that we shouldn't look like those. I look like a big bearded guy. My character looks like a big bearded guy. And that took the conception of that, even though it's sort of banked up by, like you say, 17 years of work, roughly in that area.
Yeah.
So I would say the plays are kind of all doing similar things or attempting similar things. But then they do a similar thing, but with a whole new formal structure. And that's a level of conception that takes a long time to believe in, to start with, to have hope in, I suppose. And then also, I'm aware that an audience is absolutely fundamental to the success or failure of the process. And that's always interesting for me, because often an audience just does not get it. Well, we had regularly people in performance of Salvation where we invite them very gently to turn the pages with us, and people would just sit with the books closed.
Oh, really?
And famously, we had one person who would just said, I think at the end, they said, "This is not a library, it's a theatre." Which is kind of sad, isn't it? Because maybe it's a bit new. We're inviting you to work with this, and that's not necessarily like a normal piece of theatre. But I would hope that you come to the theatre with a mind that is open enough.
Yeah.
Simply that I'm going to ask you as an audience in your head to understand this is solar. That these black pages are total solar eclipse in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do anything other than just invite you to turn a page to that, and we'll turn the sound down.
Yeah.
And so as happens in England, the gallery play that I wrote, as happens in most of the plays, if an audience member is not up for that, then there's precious little I can do about it. And I feel like we are confident enough now in our process. That's myself and Andy Smith and Carl James.
Yeah.
We're confident enough in our process to go, well, if we lose a percentage of people along the way because of the request, then that's no reason to change things to try and get them back.
Yes.
And there is a little sort of proselytizing energy to my plays, of maybe quite a big proselytizing energy to the plays, to try and get an audience to understand how they figure in this. So in this play, there is a picture of the audience.
That's
where
right.
is it? There, that one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's exactly how the audience sit in a circle. These are actually pictures of individual members of the group, but they're also replicas of simulacrum of the audience sitting, holding a book, looking at a book. And then narratively, there's an empty space there, which is Sol, because she's not attending that meeting.
That's right.
And here's the different, we have two particular design where they're my old chairs from my garden. They are orange. So we spent a bit of money and we have a slight orange tint on these two chairs. Right. So that this is figurative. This is really what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Even though this is notionally in a location in South America at the close approaching moment of solar eclipse. Yeah. So it requires an audience to put themselves into those chairs there. And I think we do what we can to get them to come in.
But then the other side of that, though, of course, and I think I may have said this, even written this somewhere, that one of the things I always feel about your kind of theatre is you kind of ruthlessly expose how the trick is done.
and then you do the trick anyway and it still works. And the example of that, I always think of the scene with holding the
this is yeah
with
this is
at the
our
end of an
daughter,
oak.
that is a tree, I'm your wife, this is a
That's
road.
right. Which
Yeah.
I always just find it's kind of desperately
Yeah.
moving. But in this one, a really good example of it is the moment you appeared, because you
Yeah.
appear very late in the play.
Yes.
And by this point, it's built up that you are a very sinister, probably rather dangerous, probably desperately mentally ill person.
Grieving father as
and
well.
basically grieving, and that's the
Yeah.
ultimate thing. But the moment you came on, I had a real sense of fear, which is so weird. But it certainly, because it's brilliantly built up, even though I can see you look nothing like the person in the book,
Yeah.
and I don't even think you're supposed to look like the person in the book.
And even though I'm trying to be as warm and inviting and as open and connected to the audience as I possibly can be, to keep it light, not to play a character as much as possible. That's the joy of it, I think, because that's the work being done by you, not by me. Or that's the work being done by the play and you, and not by the actors. We will often, and I will often, in rehearsal, not just for my work, but in other things that I sometimes direct, that conversation around actors don't own the part. You mustn't own the part. It's kind of counter to those drama school methodologies where the actor must completely own the part. It's like, no, stop doing that. We don't need that. So there are these moments in the first part when I'm not in it, where stage directions are given. She shakes uncontrollably about Sol, and Sol, the performer, who is the vehicle for that character, who doesn't look like the illustrated character, doesn't shake. So I'm trying to remove the ownership, I suppose, or trying to even out or spread the ownership between the text, between the audience, and between the actor. So there's a sort of triangulated relationship there where we read this, or there's another stage direction which says, a bird circles in the sky, and then later the bird swoops down, and we don't want at any moment a stuffed bird to be swung in from the rafters. We want that image to be held by an audience and somehow applied imaginatively in a scene that is not figuratively supporting that act. And you say it's the magic. I mean, it's not the magic, it's a human capability. That's all it is. And I suppose the counter-cultural thing is that my sense is that we've forgotten our ability, or we've lost trust in our ability to contain that triangulation, that I know this is not really this character and this is not really that location, and to understand all that and still be profoundly emotionally moved by a story that's being told. And it's a story that's being told with Salvation and with all of the plays that also somehow you exist in as well. In Salvation, you so exist because there's even pictures of you.
Yes. Though, of course, also in Salvation, overlaid on that triangular collaboration is also a slightly different thing, which is actually there is something I feel in the play about the tyranny of the playwright, in the sense of the person who rather alarmingly creates a completely counterfactual world that people are supposed to believe in, and they make other people do and say things and pretend they're not being told what to do, which of course then feeds into the structure of the cult, but it also makes us reflect on the complexity of the experience, I think.
It's crude, or it's hugely exposed in Salvation because the audience read the book, the actors read the lines from the book. There is one speech that the mother, Anna, she throws the book down and she delivers it as a actor in a play, and the text at that moment is obscured, is a swirl, so you can't. I invite audience members not to bother looking at the text, although very often audience members would still try and work through the swirl. signal there is pretty clear. Is don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And then I come on, you know, and I come on, and it can I hear someone say yes? Is a question that my character gives, and in the book, it says an audience member says yes.
That's right.
And so there were the joys of this highly sort of ethical negotiations in those moments, because, as you say, the character of Miles is a tyrant.
Yeah.
And in a way, the character of the playwright is a tyrant in that he's making people do things. And so there are moments. There are three. Can I hear someone say yes? Yeah. There are two, and no. There are some moments where I focus on an audience member and get them to read. And then the last moment in the play is when the last most interesting moment for me is where Miles just says last reading. And I don't focus on anyone. I don't select anyone. And by that time, you know what a jerk. I would hope you know what a jerk. And I always think this is the time. This is the place where I fantasize nothing will happen for 10 minutes. You know, where the audience will not comply to the tyrant of the play. And then there is also this fascinating dynamic that exists in those moments, which is when the audience want the play to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they don't want to be the ones that fuck the play up. And it would be the same with stage hypnosis, Dan. And there's a connection with this play right back to An Oak Tree, is that by and large, a lot of people who are hypnotized on stage by stage hypnotists are not officially hypnotized but they don't want to be the agent of disaster. Yeah. They want to keep the proceedings going and to be successful. Yeah. So they do the things the hypnotist asks them to do and I think that's the same in the theatre, and I think it's certainly explicitly the case in this play, is that the audience become complicit in the fictions. By standing up. I get them to stand up, he says. I mean, it's like, please don't, not please don't. I want you to, obviously I want you to, but I want the difficulty of that moment to resonate, really resonate, as we then watch one of our group read the text, or say yes to the writer, or say yes to the cult leader. And if you're seething and furious that one of your group has done that, then I'm overjoyed, then that's a really constructive emotion to have at these moments, because I think in the world, I am seething that certain people are, complying with that set of beliefs or that set of beliefs. And they are my fellow people. And what the fuck do I do about that? And how do I stop that? Yeah. And if the play was to stop, if the audience members said, can we stop this? A bit like the author, there are moments where, if the play stopped, the play sometimes did stop. It's because I'm, the distinction between who the fuck we are and who the fuck are we fictionally becomes so thin at those moments. So the problem of continuing is not just an artistic problem, it's a problem of our lives to some degree. That's very grandiose, but
no. And how do you, in the kind of development process of this, I'm imagining that it's a very fine line you're having to tread between the sort of the awfulness of audience participation that's slightly coercive, and the freedom that I always sort of feel in your stuff, because I hate audience participation. I never have that worry in your stuff, even though I've participated in your shows much more than I have in most other theatre. But I always kind of feel like, actually, I genuinely, if I don't want to do this, I don't have to do this. In a way that I don't feel if I'm on the front row of an Al Murray stand-up comedy show, I'm kind of coerced. Not that that's a bad thing, but how do you find that?
I think it's because I'm trying to do this with the screen. The play is here.
Right.
Yes. Here's the play. And here's the audience, and here's the actors, and here's the writer, and the designer, and the play is here. Yeah. And I think, to some degree, everyone is going, let's make this play work to some degree. I'm not just doing it for the writer or the actors who are the Al Murrays who say, come up on stage and do this for me. But we all have a perspective on it. And the perspective enables us to make a commitment to contribute in that sort of, I'm going to read here, because I think there is an understanding that something else is happening above and beyond just the act of contribution.
Yeah.
And that I hope you understand that through an act of contribution, something is being considered that couldn't be considered without your contribution. Well, that your act of contribution is the point of consideration, is the subject of the play to some degree, because I'm not sealing, sort of hermetically sealing the fiction into you have to believe this.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay in character like crazy. I'm going to stay in character, and this is the world. And if you come into this world, you relate with me as a character, because that doesn't exist. I mean, I know you were worried about me coming on stage, but I'm in no way doing any attempt at duping or confounding you. Yeah. I'm just coming on kind of as Tim Crouch. And I've got these lines and it says Miles, but I think it's that thing of that's where it is. Like the picture of the circle of chairs, that's where we are. Yeah. And we're also actually there as well. Yeah. So there's some duality, I think, that's played gently. It's not played like an academic lockdown or an intellectual lockdown, but is played lightly, where let's all play together. Let's all keep this, it's keepy uppy. Let's keep the ball up in the air, all of us. Yes. And let's try and count to 100. Yeah. And so I don't normally do keepy uppy, but for the game to play, I will pat the ball once or twice. Yes. Yeah.
And it's also, I mean, it is, also think there is something about the tone of the performance, particularly at the beginning, that there's a certain kind of, it's not blank, there's just kind of a lack of, I don't want to say a lack of performance energy, but there's this thing that isn't saying, I am acting somebody who's saying, what we're going to do is we're going to read a book and I'm going to tell you when to turn the page. It seems like a lot of work goes into actually making sure you are actually saying that to somebody rather than playing the part of somebody who is saying that in another situation.
Yes, the most recent thing, the I Sinner the Poet thing that I did, we did at the Unicorn Theatre. In rehearsal for that, we discovered this distinction between presentational acting and invitational acting. And I don't know if that's useful, and that requires a lot more thinking about, but I think we're tempting invitational and not presentational. That our objective, our primary objective is an active invitation. Yeah. The word invitation is used a lot. I invite you in an oak tree. All the language around the second actor and me is all about, this is an invitation. Yeah. Invitation feels really generous as a word because you can decline the invitation. Yes. It's not an order. It's not a request even. I invite you that we do this. I invite that we imagine this is somewhere else. The invitation is that I am someone else. I'm not going to do anything to transform myself, but the invitation is there. So there's a lot of work, and it's interesting bringing actors in. Susan and Siobhan, who were the two performers with me in the play. It was fantastic for me and Carl and Andy to try, and as we do every time in a way, to unpack the language that we use. Yeah. So that because Siobhan was still at the Royal Academy in Scotland, you know, she's getting the other stuff. She's getting the presentational stuff. Yeah. And for us to find a way to go, it's not that we need you to ditch everything you've been taught up till now. That's so not what we're talking about. We're still using some of those skills and qualities, but then there is also something that this play does not require from you, which is about, you know, commitment, I suppose, or psychological or emotional commitment. And it's really clearly structured in the stage directions. You know, she shakes, she cries, her mouth is dry, her heart is pounding. I want an audience to read your heart is pounding without your heart pounding. Yeah. I want you to know that, I want the audience to understand you're destroyed for your dead child without you being destroyed for an imaginary dead child. And that's, again, that notion of distance is, this is where we're putting all the ingredients. It's all coming into here.
Yeah.
And your ingredients, audience, are just as important as the team, because without your ingredients, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. The idea of doing this play without an audience was impossible. So we always in rehearsal brought people in, you know, always. We had people, strangers, people, students, anyone. And Sin of the Poet as well, the audience right. Oddly, I don't think Terrestrial Salvation would have happened without Sin of the Poet. So Sin of the Poet, there's an invitation. The invitation is to write.
Yeah.
The audience all have a notebook and a pencil. They write notes, we write notes together, then they have to engage with some thoughts for themselves. What would they die for? What would they kill for? And then the main action of the play in Sinner, his death, is rendered by each member of the audience through their words, the words that they write. Yeah. And I think it was about, I wouldn't have had the guts maybe to then think about reading together without having somewhere in my past. Sin of the Poet was written in 2012. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But again, it's the same thing, is that, the actor playing Sin of the Poet is not really Sin of the Poet. Sin of the Poet exists here, and you as an audience are throwing in your text and throwing in your responses, and that's where the character exists over there, and we all own him.
Yes. The other thing, the thing that surprised me, I suppose, and I don't know why it surprised me, I don't know what I was expecting actually when I went to see it, was actually how sad it was. It felt so melancholy the whole way through. And of course, you sort of appreciate that that's because this huge cosmological apparatus is the product of grief and being unable to accept the thought that your young son has died in a terrible accident.
And you are part way responsible for that with Miles. He is in some way, Anna says, I told him not to. I told him not to. Oh my God. It's the swirly speech. He couldn't back down, couldn't admit with your brother, Felix, the tragedy of it, the whole tragedy. I told him not to. The ice, we watched it from the lakeside, you and me. How do you deal with that? Not like this, she says. You don't do this, not all this. Which on one level is the story, but also, I'm expanding exponentially, universally into all this. What do you do with art? Where does art, where's the place of art? What's the role of art? It's what an oak tree is all about. How do I deal with absence? Is it about creating something? What he does is he creates mammothly and manages to bring people in onto his creation. As one could argue, we started this conversation, the playwright creates the universe.
Yeah.
They are universe builders, theatre makers, not just playwrights, theatre makers. You then, as an audience, you enter that world, you enter that universe, and things are done differently there to how you would do in the universe that's happening on the street outside the theatre. And you accept things that would never be acceptable elsewhere, because the universe enables you. The structured universe enables you to.
I also sort of felt, you may reject this thought as well. It felt to me as well, it was a bit about masculinity. It felt like it seemed like it was a distinctively sort of, I don't want to have crass generalizations, but it felt like it was a recognizably male thing, to rather than just kind of address failure and loss and longing and guilt, to build the most outrageously ridiculous structure that is about denying it. I don't know, did you feel it? There was Loki thing.
Well, I would like to think that was totally conscious on the writer's part. Yes, I mean, it's subtle. Having such visions, says Sol, even the men even, and she says even the men. I thought there was something about yes, I mean, completely. so the swirly speech, she says, I didn't fight enough, I didn't fight. Maybe 30 of us left, she says. The women, mostly women. The men stayed. They tried to restrain us. No one was killed, love, no one. So, yeah, the notion of patriarchy is incredibly strong. And if you look at world religions, that's where the men have come to the fore in a way. Religion that denies even the presence of women in their spaces. So not wanting to make it just about that, but I do feel very much it's about a man and a man's ego unable to acknowledge that he has been responsible for the death of his child. And instead of wising up and going, I'm really sorry, manning up, that's the wrong phrase, and saying, shit, how can we build from this? He creates a whole other world. He creates a whole other fictional world, and then has to push it to the end. You know, he has to walk the talk or talk the walk, whatever he does. And then, the end, I hope we all realize what a prick, what a powerful prick he has been to bring us through this experience. Even to the point where, you know, the illustrations take the story one way. In the illustrations, we think the girl has left with her mother, then the girl comes back. That was another one of those blinding realizations that happened. Maybe I know exactly when it happened. One of those thoughts that you have where you don't then have to work again for the rest of the day, which is fucking hell. She can come back. She comes back. So there is this, whatever the word, I don't know what the word is, but these two universes suddenly coexist. The world of the illustrations where she's gone on a plane to La Paz and she's had ice cream, and the world of the action where maybe that woman, the mother, didn't even exist ever. You know, I don't know, throws everything up in the air, and she comes back and she says, I'm sorry, I was asleep. And he says, I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come. And I'm hoping the audience is going, no, I don't want this ending. But sadly, that maybe is the ending of our world now.
Yeah.
You know, that's the modern world's ending. And the illustrations are kind of a hopeful nod to an alternative. But in terms of wanting to leave an audience really problematized by the event, I want the girl sitting there with her dad. And there are hints of abuse, you know. She's not having her period anymore. He's giving them stuff. He's giving them stuff to get, is he giving you stuff? Yes. Supplements. Where does he get those from? You know, there is something deeply suspect about the way Miles is manipulating the group of people. And manipulating the women. There is an amazing Netflix documentary called The End of the World Cult, actually, that we all watched, which is about a man called Michael who sleeps with his son's wives and has a collection of young women who look adoringly at him. I mean, there is something in the genderized aspect. We're not explicit in it, but I'm certainly aware of it. And in the same way that with the author, you know, the Tim Crouch is a man. Tim Crouch is a man. The author is a man. That vile piece of work is a man. It would be very strange, I think, if a female, if it was not played by a man. I don't know if it would ring as true to the world.
It's interesting when I think about all your plays that very often actually harm coming to children is the horrific center. You know, an oak tree, obviously. The author. I guess, you know, there's that, you know, I mean, in a sense, my arm feels like it's a bit that as well, because sort of strange, you know, it's an interesting I'm trying to think about death. I mean, in Beginners as well, is about death, really. It's about young people dealing with death. One of the characters, their father has died, and at the end, he comes back. He comes back in the play. He descends out of the heavens
That's right.
and says, "I hope you're okay, and I'm sorry that Mum is dating again." The boy says, and the father says, "It's okay." And the boy says, "He's not as cool as you." And the father says, "It's okay." And then there is a song which is called "It's Okay."
That's right.
Everything is okay.
Yeah.
Dan, I mean, in the absence of in my universe of urgent, personal, unresolvable things, there is that as a father, there is always the presence of the imaginative unimaginable, which is the loss of a child. And I suppose that's a trigger to get it's a trigger to ensure the work is not just intellectual. It feels like emotions are the best vehicles for ideas, I think. So if you don't acknowledge their presence or write into them, then the whole process feels very arid and a little sterile, I think.
Last question. So you've been writing for close on 20 years. Blunt question. What do you think you've learnt? What have you got better at? What do you know how to do now that maybe you didn't 15 years ago? And this doesn't have to be, by the way, generalizable tips for other playwrights. It's just about your writing, really.
Yeah. I mean, if I want to be depressingly honest, I've learnt. I can't say I've learnt nothing, but I would say that every play, and this is not a glib thing, every play feels like it is starting again.
Right.
Yeah, starting again. Have I learned anything? Fuck. I mean, with dialogue, I maybe have learned a little around economy.
Okay.
Maybe that's something, but maybe I had that. I don't know. It's interesting because I'm working with Toby on this TV stuff, and so Toby is not an experienced writer, and I suppose I would now be deemed to be an experienced writer. When you say nearly 20 years, that sounds like forever. And I think there is a quality that I might bring to the relationship that he and I have, which is around crafting a scene, in terms of holding things back, creating space as much as possible, trying to let the space read as strongly as the words. Although in telly that's slightly different because that's partly the director's job. To do that, but becoming a little bit more aware in telly and also, yes, more aware in theatre, how overwriting is a pernicious evil. Is it's in terms of that ownership thing, you know, in terms of ownership, if I just wrote, then the stuff would be mine. And I don't want the stuff to be mine. I want the stuff to be ours. And the way I would achieve that collectivization is by trying to put as little in as possible. So if that's just a crude plea for economy, then that might be what I've learned. But it's not economy just because I want plays to be an hour long. It's because I want... I don't want an audience to be overwhelmed by the text. Maybe that's the only thing I can...
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
That's great. As always, this has been completely fascinating. Thank you very much, Tim.
A pleasure, Dan. Lovely to talk to you.